It's a beautiful sunny day here in Wales. I hope you're having a great Sunday. Thank you for joining me for another one of my videos. Let's get straight on with the price action analysis on the mighty Bitcoin. So I thought I'd start off with a little bit of a confluence perspective. So I've put on a Fibonacci retracement here on the daily time frame from basically the current low, which is 74.5, up to the current high, which happened last week at 98, more or less. And then you got the Fibonacci retracement. And you can see that, because I don't think this has really pulled back yet, this move. Now, Fibonacci is subjective because it depends when you put it on, it depends where you start and finish it. But I'm doing it for this price action. And this basically would suggest to me that if Bitcoin pulls back in a meaningful way, which it hasn't really yet on the daily time frame, but if it did, then there's a few areas of interest. And the one I'm going to specifically mention is about 88. So 88K corresponds to the 382, which is a shallow pullback on Fibonacci terms. And it's also a support resistance area for this whole kind of sideways and down section here. So I think should Bitcoin start to pull back in a meaningful way, I know it already has a bit, but in a meaningful way, then I would have that as a good target for a pullback. Lower than that would be 85, which is this support resistance area. And that's still fair game, right? That's just a 50% retracement of the overall recent daily uptrend. So I think anywhere kind of in that pocket, it's fair game. Right, having done that, I'm going to move on to the lower time frames and then the higher time frames. So I'm sort of doing it a bit like middle start, end, that sort of thing. So the 4-hour time frame, you can see it's consolidating in a sideways and up posture at the moment. And indeed, this is a real technical analysis, and it's not me, but what Bitcoin's doing. I think I kind of know about technical analysis of a chart, but Bitcoin definitely knows about it. So there's an impulsive move up here with increasing volatility on the 4-hour time frame, followed by a narrowing of the Bollinger Band, so a reduction in volatility, followed by another impulsive move to the upside with expanding volatility, and then another sideways move. It did try and go again here, but ultimately that didn't really come to much, and now the volatility is cooling off once again. And you can see that if Bitcoin starts to close 4-hour timeframes, basically lower than where it is now, because it's right on the bottom of the Bollinger Band, so effectively below this support area, which is coming in, so where price is now, 95.5. If it starts to close 4-hour candles below there in a meaningful way, then that will give volatility expansion to the downside. So that'll be a downside move. And you can also see that the MACD, in the way I use it with the zero line, is getting close to the zero line. And indeed, volatility expanding to the downside would likely flip momentum to the downside on the 4-hour time frame as well. The bear zone on the RSI, which again, that would reinforce both of the things I've just mentioned, comes in at around, just call it 95, so not a million miles away from where Bitcoin is at the moment. So it's on a 4-hour time frame in summary, what I'm saying is that the 4-hour really doesn't have to work too hard to get a meaningful downside move going here. And really several closures below 95,000 would likely manifest that. Just checking on the daily, I know I already kind of did the daily, but momentum's still very much to the upside on the daily. It is kind of waning a little bit on the RSI, but to be honest, I'm not calling bearish divergence until there's a proper pullback, because I don't really see this as having had a top yet. And so you can't, in my eyes, you can't really call bearish divergence on a momentum indicator like the RSI without having a top or having a high. In fact, you need two highs to then have bearish divergence. You need a higher high, and I don't really see that as the case here. And then you need a high and a lower high on the RSI. So personally, I don't see it myself, but that's fairly subjective. You can see the momentum indicator in regards to the MACD is still very much above the zero line. So for me, from the point of view of momentum on the daily, still to the upside. And I think that holds true for as long as Bitcoin's above 91, which is the midpoint of the Bollinger Band. Right, the weekly now. CME closed. And where did it close its weekly candle? It closed it not as strong as last week. Clearly, this was last week's closure, which did, don't know if you remember the video, I did say that's a bit of a key closure above the midpoint of the Bollinger Band. And it closed this week's price action above the midpoint of the Bollinger Band. But not the most bullish of weeks. However, certainly not bearish. And as I pointed out a few times, without volatility expanding on the weekly time frame, this is all kind of smoke and mirrors, to be honest, because it's just sideways. Like on the meaningful time frames, which tend to be the higher ones, so the weekly time frame here, this is nothing volatility. So it's very likely that price action will bounce significantly in between those two areas, and they are basically the current all-time high, 107, and more or less 80k. So somewhere between on the weekly time frame, and it's just sideways price action, just like here. There's probably people freaking out during this price action, but nothing really changed on the higher time frames until volatility expanded there, and then it was all over really in 3 weeks. This was obviously a more prolonged move to the upside, but the same happened again. Low volatility on the weekly time frame, no great shakes, right? And then it expanded to the upside. So the significance of closing above the midpoint as of the week before, was that if volatility is going to expand, then where the price is compared to the midpoint gives you a steer on the direction of the move. So that's why it's useful. And you can see that the momentum has picked up from a similar level to over here. It didn't immediately lead to the expansive move to the upside, though. And similar way, so it's doing a similar thing here to that which it did over here as well. So two, sort of similar patterns occurring in this bull run so far. And if you're a trader or an investor, then you look for history to rhyme with what's happening in current times. It won't repeat, but it may rhyme. And it looks like there's a rhyme coming on here to me on the weekly time frames. Now, it's a slight. Well, I haven't looked actually weekly on the perpetual exchanges. Oh no, it's very similar. So it looks like the perpetual exchanges are likely to close above the midpoint on the Bollinger Band as well, which is currently around 92, call it. So unless Bitcoin does some serious downside price action in the next 9 hours, that'll be another weekly closure above the midpoint of Bollinger Band on the perpetual exchanges as well as CME. But you can see there's likely to be a gap occurring because of the differential between. No, I don't know. Right, shouldn't count my chickens. But if this perpetual exchange, which one are you? Your Bitstamp. Then if Bitstamp closes anywhere near where the current price is, then you'll end up potentially with a little bit of a gap on CME, which it'll likely fill. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But for me, all this is telling me is that, yeah, maybe the next move will be to the downside, probably on the lower time frames, i.e. the 4-hour and the daily. I think that a pullback towards the high 80s is just fine, and wouldn't really change very much at all. Weekly time frames, a little bit different. I don't want to see a weekly closure personally below about 90. It's different for different exchanges, but I think you're getting the point now. All right, take it easy, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you for joining me. Please like and subscribe. That'd be very kind.